When I was 8 years old, my father took me to a construction site before sunrise. The grass was wet, the air smelled like concrete dust and rain. And I remember standing on a stack of plywood while my father pointed toward a steel beam running across the ceiling of a half-finished house. "You see that beam, Frankie?" he asked me. "That's the thing holding everything up." Then he looked down at me and smiled. "One day that'll be you." I believed him. Back then my father was my hero, Richard Hale, owner of Hale and Sons Construction. The kind of man who shook hands like promises meant something, and for a long time I thought they did. My mother died when I was 7. Cancer, fast, cruel. The kind that turns a house quiet forever. After she died, it was just me, my father, and my grandfather Walter. Walter Hale was the real foundation of the company. My father built houses. Walter built stability. Every Sunday after church, he let me sit beside him in his office while he reviewed contracts. The office smelled like cedar wood and black coffee. And every time I stamped an invoice with the company seal, he'd smile like I was already part of something important. One afternoon, I was 9 years old when my grandfather looked at me and said something I didn't understand at the time. "Never let anyone make you feel like a guest in your own family." I didn't understand it then, but years later, those words would become the only reason I survived what came next. Because then Diane arrived. My father met Diane Carter when I was 18. She had soft eyes, perfect manners, a daughter named Lily. At first, Diane seemed kind, too kind. She baked casseroles, laughed at all my father's jokes, touched his arm every time he spoke. She made him feel alive again. And honestly, for a while I was happy for him, until I realized Diane's kindness had limits. It reached my father, it reached Lily. It reached neighbors, church friends, waiters, photographers, but it never fully reached me. Her smile always changed when my father left the room. Softer, colder, measured. 3 months after the wedding, she asked if Lily could use my bedroom as an art room while I was away at college. My posters disappeared. My books were boxed up. The framed photo of my parents' wedding vanished from the fireplace. In its place, a new family portrait, my father, Diane, Lily, and me standing awkwardly near the edge like someone accidentally included in the picture. That became my role in the family after Diane arrived. The edge. Every year it got worse. The phone calls got shorter, the invitations became miscommunications. Holidays shifted without anyone telling me. "Oh honey, we thought you weren't coming this year. We already made plans, maybe next Christmas." And every single time my father acted confused, like he had simply forgotten. But forgetting someone over and over again is still a choice. I wanted to become a structural engineer. I loved the idea of designing things strong enough to carry impossible weight. Maybe because deep down, I already knew what it felt like to carry too much. When I asked my father for help paying for college, he rubbed the back of his neck and glanced toward Diane before answering. "Engineering is expensive, Frankie. Maybe teaching would make more sense." Maybe teaching. Meanwhile, Diane was paying for Lily's dance competitions, private lessons, summer camps. I worked nights at a copy center, graduated with student loans. My father came to the ceremony, stayed 20 minutes, left before dinner because Diane had reservations somewhere else. That was the pattern. I stayed, he left, and somehow I kept pretending it wasn't personal, until my grandfather died. Walter Hale passed away from a heart attack at 79 years old. The funeral packed the church. People cried harder for him than most people cry for family. That's the kind of man he was. After the service, his attorney pulled me aside. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter in Walter's handwriting, and one sentence changed everything. "Your father is a good man with a weak spine." Then came the second sentence. "This company was never meant to erase you." I stared at the paper while my hands shook. The attorney explained that my grandfather had secretly placed 40% of Hale and Sons Construction into a trust under my name. I inherited it fully at 30. My father knew the trust existed, but he didn't know the details. And buried inside the operating agreement was one clause my grandfather specifically created for me. If I ever voluntarily walked away from the company, the remaining members would be legally required to buy out my shares at full market value, and if they couldn't pay within 90 days, they would lose operational control of the business. At 24, that sounded impossible. At 32, it sounded inevitable. For 2 years after inheriting my shares, I tried fixing things. I emailed my father asking for meetings. No response. I mailed certified letters, ignored. I invited him to lunch, canceled. I called Diane once asking why I was being shut out of a company I legally owned. She laughed softly and said something I'll never forget. "Frankie, if you really wanted to be part of this family, you'd stop making everything so difficult. Stop making things difficult." As if my existence itself had become inconvenient. Then came the text message. "Father's Day dinner, Sunday, 6 p.m. Be there." That was unusual. My father almost never contacted me directly anymore. Aunt Claire called me later that night. "They're planning something," she whispered. "How big?" "There's a photographer." "A photographer for a Father's Day dinner." That's when the feeling started, the one deep in my chest. The same feeling engineers get before a structure collapses. Not fear, recognition. I called my grandfather's attorney the next morning. "If I decide to trigger the clause, how fast can the paperwork be prepared?" Silence. Then by Thursday, and suddenly everything became real. Friday afternoon, I walked into my father's house carrying folding chairs. The dining room looked like a wedding reception. Candles, gold decorations, 25 place settings, and there, sitting on the kitchen counter, was the frame, gold edges, elegant calligraphy, certificate of adoption. My stomach dropped. Lily's full name was written beneath my father's. Adult adoption papers, official, permanent. I heard Lily laughing in the next room. "I'm finally becoming a real Hale," she said. Real. That word stayed with me the entire drive home. Real daughter, real family, real replacement. That night, I sat alone in my apartment staring at the operating agreement my grandfather left behind. 43 pages, one clause, one decision, and one question. How many times can someone quietly erase you before you finally stop asking for permission to exist? The next day, I signed the papers. Not because I hated my father, but because I finally understood something painful. He was never going to choose me. Sunday arrived, Father's Day. I wore my mother's earrings. Small gold hoops with blue stones, the only thing of hers I still had. When I pulled into the driveway, cars lined both sides of the street. Inside the house, everyone was smiling, laughing, celebrating something I hadn't officially been told yet. Diane greeted me at the door with fake warmth. "Oh good, you made it." Like she wasn't surprised. Like she hadn't spent 14 years making sure I stayed emotionally outside the house even when physically inside it. I found my seat, very end of the table, far from my father, far from the center. Exactly where I'd been placed for years. Then my father stood up with a wine glass in his hand. The room went quiet, and for 4 straight minutes he spoke about Diane and Lily. He called Lily his blessing, his joy, his greatest gift. Then he picked up the adoption certificate and smiled through tears. "I finally have the daughter I always deserved." The room exploded in applause, people cried, the photographer snapped pictures nonstop, and me, I sat perfectly still. Because after years of being erased slowly, you stop expecting anyone to notice when you disappear completely. That was the moment the 48-hour cancellation window expired. I never called the lawyer. 9 days later, the letter arrived, and my father called me screaming. "What is this?" I sat calmly at my desk reviewing structural drawings while he panicked on the other end of the phone. "You're destroying this family." "No," I answered quietly. "I'm honoring the contract grandfather wrote." Then came the silence, heavy silence, the kind that finally forces people to hear themselves. The emergency family meeting happened the following Saturday. Same dining room, same table, same house. Only this time there were no balloons, no photographer, no celebration, just fear. My father looked exhausted, Diane looked furious, Lily looked terrified, and sitting beside me was my attorney. When my lawyer read Clause 7.3 aloud, the entire room changed. Because for the first time in 14 years, I wasn't the powerless one at the table anymore. Diane tried guilt first, then tears, then manipulation. "Families don't solve problems like this," she whispered. I looked directly at her. "You had 14 years to solve this without lawyers." Then I showed them the screenshots, the group chat. "Reclassify her shares as dormant. She won't notice. Change the office locks." My father went pale, and for the first time in years he looked ashamed, not defensive, not angry, ashamed. I think that hurt worse, because deep down he knew. He knew exactly what he allowed to happen. My aunt finally stood up and said what nobody else had the courage to say. "Harold would be ashamed of you." The room went silent. My father looked smaller than I had ever seen him, like a man realizing too late that neglect still counts as betrayal. Then he asked the question that finally revealed everything. "Where am I supposed to get $320,000 in 90 days? Not, how do I fix this? Not, how do I repair our relationship? Just money. Just consequences." That's when I realized something. The little girl standing on plywood beside her father, she was gone, and maybe she had been gone for years. 3 weeks later, the first installment check arrived. $100,000. I deposited it quietly. No celebration, no revenge, just closure. The company took loans. My father refinanced equipment. Diane stopped talking about Lily joining the business. And me, I kept designing hospitals, parking structures, buildings made to survive pressure. Because unlike my family, I finally understood what strong foundations actually look like. I didn't win. There's no victory in watching your own father choose someone else. But I learned something my grandfather tried teaching me years ago. Your place at the table is never something people give you. It's something you decide you deserve. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is walk away from the people who spent years pretending you were already gone.